I'd like to welcome everyone to our first meeting of the SAU School Board here in the 2022-2023 school year. We've got a pretty short agenda, but some pretty important topics to discuss. We are going to open up first with our public comment, 1 of 2. Let's see, no members of the public present. We are going to go on to the core of what we're going to discuss tonight, and that's our superintendent search process. Our committee was actually formulated several months ago, led by Mr. Conklin and his team, and they've got a pretty phenomenal proposal to present to us tonight and explain and articulate the pros and cons of their process and some recommendations. Mr. Conklin.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the committee for their hard work. We met 3 times since our last SAU meeting. And also I'd like to include Amina in that, who was with us for several meetings. One of those meetings was actually interviews with the various firms, and one of which you'll hear about tonight. And the 2 other meetings were doing the work that you'll be presented tonight, talking about what we learned and moving this process forward. So I feel like we did a lot of work in a quick amount of time, and I want to thank everybody for their efforts. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the subcommittee is recommending by a vote for email affirmation or talking to someone tonight now by a vote 6-0 to hire an outside firm to assist with the hiring of our future superintendent. So that's the big news that comes out of the meeting, that we are all recommending hiring a firm to help us with this process. And we can move on to the next slide and we'll hear a little bit about the pros and cons that we found. So this came out of our final meeting after meeting with the 3 different firms. We talked about why we may or may not want to hire a firm. The cons are pretty simple, right? It costs money, which we recognize and understand. The other con is sort of more, I don't know, I sort of was trying to put that phrasing together this morning. I think it's more about there will be another set of hands in the pie that we are really ceding any ownership. We all have ultimate control and ownership of the process, but of course, when you introduce a second or a third party, things can sometimes get a little mucked up. But the pros, we would add legitimacy and expertise to the search process. We would have a neutral third party as our guide. We believe that a robust search will be necessary and could potentially weigh on an already understaffed administration and a board that has a lot of work to do. Finding a quality administrator we felt is imperative, and using a firm would help us stay ahead of a race that is likely to be run by many schools in the coming years. A firm will help the board pinpoint the needs of our district. So they will work with us to help us figure out what we're really saying when we say, here's what we want. They will help us put that into a form that will be used for recruiting, which I think would be very helpful. We'll hit the ground running. So if we decide to hire a firm, we would get that started, and as soon as the next couple of weeks, have the first meeting to get things really moving. The recruitment process that we would undergo is comprehensive with the firm, and they would help us make sure that we end up with the right fit. The recommended firm that we are going to present does provide a warranty. So in other words, if we don't find someone, they will keep working with us. If the person that we hire leaves after less than 2 years, they will also help us find someone. That is not completely free. We have to pay for things like travel costs and gas and things like that, but it is a much lower rate than we would have to pay, and we will already have worked with them. So we will be in a good position, and they ultimately would help us if that happens. We will hopefully get the right fit the first time and avoid turnover, which we know can be difficult for our staff and our community and our students. And the board will remain an integral part of this process, but using a firm will help prevent any bias that might seep into the process. You can go ahead and move the slide. So who gets our rose? It is the NESDEC search firm. Why? NESDEC is already familiar with our SAU. We use them for enrollment numbers, so they have an understanding of our SAU and our districts. Our lead agent would be a former Hollis Brookline superintendent, so clearly knows the area well. And we were able to meet directly with that lead agent and felt he answered questions professionally and thoughtfully. He is well connected with administrator groups and conducted successful searches for other local SAUs. We already, like I said, have a relationship and therefore receive a discount Even if we decide to use NASDAQ to run community forums, which are an extra charge, they would still be less expensive than our other options. And Anna, I don't know if you would like to speak a little bit. Anna did some really great work speaking to other communities who have used the various firms that we looked at, and I know she had some strong notes for NASDAQ.
Can I do that now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So what I did is I went through all three of the firms, gave us a whole list of people that the top three we were interviewing, of districts that they had worked with. And they had references, but I went and called the people that weren't on the reference list, because I think that's gives you, I mean, I don't want the person who I know they've already talked to ahead of time, and we know is necessarily going to say something good. But we got really, really, really good feedback on NASDAQ. And a few things that came out across all the focus, all the people I talked to, is they said, everybody said we hired and we used either NASDAQ or another group because we wanted transparency. We didn't want it to look like we just picked someone. We didn't really know what we were doing, and we didn't have the time to kind of get up to speed and do all of that. I gotta say, these people are really nice. These are all just other school board people, 30 to 45 minutes, every single one of them on the phone. Wonderful people. They recommended things like putting up a website for the superintendent search, a page, getting an email called Super Search. So we could look at Nashua and Portsmouth for samples of how that was done. I don't know, a bunch of stuff like that. But one of the things they talked about was using, doing community focus groups when they're hiring. An example that I'll give you from Portsmouth, which was actually a different one, but they said like they weren't sure. The board felt it was really important potentially for someone to be local and live in Portsmouth. But it's really expensive to live in Portsmouth, and they were worried, is that gonna be a problem? Like if we hire someone outside of Portsmouth, is the Portsmouth community gonna be really upset? So they did like 3 different focus groups talking about what do we want for a superintendent, what are the characteristics, what matters. They asked this, and what they got for them, and it's not that it would be the same here, but for them, overwhelmingly, the answer was, we want someone who has been in the classroom in the past. We don't care if they live in Portsmouth or not. Okay. So that's great. So that was what Josh was referring to as far as we could use this group, and they do have an add-on at a very reasonable rate to do some local focus groups if we want to do that. We call them focus groups. They're also kind of like community forums, but bringing in people and getting their views on that. NASDAQ is great about, and the feedback I got, and I talked to folks to back up real quick from Hollis and Milford. Not the last Milford search they did on their own. They pointed out that did not end well, but the more recent one. And they all said they were really, really happy with them. They did a great job with like questionnaires they send out to the community at the beginning, trying to get feedback, guiding you on how to make sure the community is involved in the process, helping you formulate what you want the ad to say. So it's not just like a generic, yeah, hey, SAU 39, we're looking for superintendent, but who we're looking for, what we're looking for, those sort of things. And I heard repeatedly, they were one of the least expensive, but we didn't feel like we gave up anything in exchange for that. So I thought that was good feedback to get from the folks. So I've got some more stuff if we get into it further that we can talk about at some later time, such as there's a program called New Hampshire Listens that works for community outreach. And that Primex, our insurance company, will do a board and administration goals meeting if we ever want to do that, to help us set goals for free. And maybe that's been done when I wasn't here, but for free. Yeah, I was like hearing that. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but that was my takeaway at the end of the day from it was that we should hire NASDAQ after I talked to all the people I talked about, all the different ones. What we did is when we did the final interview, we actually did a kind of blind vote before I shared what I learned, and there was a kind of consensus even before that. So
Awesome. You can go ahead to the next slide. So to follow up on what Anna just said, yes, we did take a blind vote after interviewing, and everybody was in support of NASDAQ. So we move forward with that recommendation. A little bit, you all can read this. I don't want to read all of this out. I want to make sure we have a lot of time for questions and discussion if needed. But I know one of the main questions is, well, what are they going to actually do? And these are the highlighted bullet points. It's in the proposal that you can see, they sort of breaks out from there what that actually means. But these are the bullet points of what they would actually help us do. And with that, I want to make sure we have time for questions, discussions, before we move on to potential next steps.
Great, questions?
Can I say one thing about the outline, and when we talk about setting, I mean, part of the reason we met now instead of waiting is because they said it would be really, really good. You know, to pull the trigger, start doing things quicker rather than later, because although we do have these deadlines, we kind of talked about later about, you know, a lot of people are looking in the November, 10th, December time period, because that's when they're coming up on giving notices. Yeah, they also said a lot of people who know they want to change, want to know early, may have already applied, you know, you don't want to lose those people. And kind of an earlier, better was the sense we got. And that if we waited till our regular meeting on the 25th and then pulled the trigger, we were potentially going to be a little behind the 8 ball there as far as where we want to be.
Any questions?
What is the cost and how are we budgeting this?
So the cost is the baseline cost, I believe, I can look in the proposal, it's 10,200.
That's what I thought you were enforcing.
And then the community forums, which again, we can either do with NASDAQ or we can take some guidance and do them ourselves if we want to save on that. They're $280 each. So if we wanted to run 3, for example, then that would be, you know, another $900.
And Amy, do we have the scope of the SAU budget for next year?
We did budget for it, and Amy's checking we can't remember off the top of our head how much we budgeted.
Thank you.
I want to say it was ballpark 10.
I think that's right.
Is this the first? I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask what our budget looked like, but I really like the idea of a focus group. I want to make sure that whatever money we approve to be spent includes focus group.
Should we put a cap on that, Stephanie, in terms of like getting capped at $3,000, $4,000?
Yeah, I mean, you could put a cap on it, I think on any of it, so that if anything starts to exceed, come back and justify why. Yeah.
Well, at 280 each, we're doing.
Yeah,
$34,000.
yeah, but what I'm wondering is that just quote unquote for the ability to have it, and you gotta pay travel and mileage and room and board and meals, and you know, it adds like that's.
So the way
Or
that-
the margin.
One of the nice things about this group is they're local, so it's not like some of the groups we looked at, we would have been paying someone to come in from, say, New Jersey or something like that. Which would add a whole lot more to that cost. And so, yeah, there's not gonna be a lot of costs, and a lot of those, and some of them would probably be done for people.
Okay.
Kind of a mix.
The resume that we're included.
And there are other fee-based options, like if the board decided we really wanted a fancy brochure to go out along with our letter, then that is additional cost, but that is true of most of these companies. If you want a fancy trifold brochure to go along with the letter you're sending to someone, that's gonna cost more.
When we were, when we were comparing the 3 different firms that we interviewed, there was nothing that NASDAQ is charging us for that the other firms weren't charging us for, either as an additional or their base price was already several thousand higher than this.
Yeah,
So we budgeted, I say budgeted, we didn't know about this when we were doing the budget. So this is funds that are left because of all the different personnel changes. So what we planned on was 10,000.
okay,
But there are potential additional funds that would be available for this extra work. So.
Stephanie,
Can I ask the search committee, what made this company stand out amongst the other, 2?
Yes.
For me, it was because they were local. I didn't consider price on any of them up front. It was because they were local. Kenda Benedictus is a former superintendent to the other representative. He's from the area. There's a team involved. It's not just one person. We met with two different people in the meeting, and they seemed to have each other's back the whole time on the Zoom. The first group didn't seem to really be as organized as the other two. And, you know, this one just kind of shined through compared to the other two.
This interview seemed a little bit more down to earth while also feeling well qualified. If that makes sense, that balance was there.
And Anna, during your background sort of calls, where did most of the solicited candidates come from? Were they local candidates as well, or regional candidates or national candidates?
So I would have to, you know, the problem is I'm gonna mix up who I talk to. But all those things. I mean, I heard again and again from different board members, if you're gonna get someone outside of like the immediate New England area, be really clear about why they want to be here.
Yeah.
I heard, you know, stories from Manchester, you know, almost immediately applying for jobs in Nashville. Like, so they're just like, be careful, you know, be careful because you don't want someone who's just looking for this as the next step on some path they're on. I will say that there were two of the three that really were much more highly endorsed by the people I called than one. And the other one, I would have been comfortable going with that candidate as well, or that company as well. The one difference I got, was that NESDEC has this one individual that we'll be working with who is familiar with our area. The other company, other people were happy with them and had good things to say about them. Kind of has people who work with you and then another person who comes in to do some of the stuff. And I heard a little bit of it, and that person didn't necessarily know quite as much about the local. But very good positive things. I don't want to say anything bad about overall, it was very positive as well. But it was things like that, that to me, it's actually not a little bit.
To me, it just checked all the boxes because they're local, they're reasonably priced, they do all the services that we need. Like everything was, to me, it was looking at their estimate, like there's really no downside to this. And then plus the positive feedback from folks that work with them, there's really, like, it kind of seems like a, you know,
So like in terms of focus groups, I think we would need to do one for each one of our districts for employees, right? So meeting with the Amherst school system, the Mount Vernon school system, the Swaven school system. Then one for community members, one for business leaders, because I think that's also important. So, you know, 5 to 6 community focus groups at 250 apiece, I think is completely reasonable, as long as there's no exorbitant additional cost of it.
They also said they like doing the community outreach via survey. So maybe we can decide if some of those might be more appropriate as a survey.
Yeah.
And that might save us a little bit of money, or maybe the survey comes back and we don't think the results are what we're looking for, so then we switch to it. I don't know.
I think that one of the nice things about this too is because you're working mainly with one lead agent. We will have an initial meeting where we will figure some of this stuff out, and he might be able to coach us through, well, you know, look, I will be there and you can pay me to do this, but maybe you as a board can do it with your community members, right? But I'll do it with your teachers, and so there's an element of working together to figure out the right path forward. So I think some of this, assuming that we would want to hire NESDEC, that first initial meeting would be where we would lay out a schedule and a plan for those kinds of things. And we can definitely ask them those questions about, and I think we would get honest answers around where the most value would be, where the most bang for our buck would be.
Okay.
Is this the group that hired the national superintendent?
No.
They also have really great expertise in like what's successful community engagement that I think is really beneficial, like that balance between in-person and remote access and have listening sessions and whatnot, like that expertise is really, really beneficial to get the right information out of our community and other stakeholders.
Awesome. And focus groups, it says here, they're conducted by video conference, which I would say, given where we are, is okay. But I certainly would recommend that we request to be live, person to person, not just video conference. I think we can get a better read on the situation with online meetings.
I was gonna say, just to be clear, the focus groups themselves are also separate from potentially other avenues of community involvement. You know, I mean, when we're down to top choices, if we have community, we've done the interviews before, we bring people in to meet them. All that stuff is, they do a lot of the community outreach and the community involvement and keeping the community updated, separate from the kind of limited. The focus group part, I guess, is more to answer specific questions. Like, how do we want to approach this? What's important on this? Those sort of things. And so I don't know. Yeah, we can talk to them about what that scope looks like and how many would be useful and, I don't know, how they do it beyond that, but just want to clarify that. Like, it's not the only way of communicating with the community.
So if it's okay with you, Josh, and that's a perfect segue over to, let's come up with a hypothetical what this process looks like over the course of the next, 5 months if we did it.
You're asking me to lay out that?
Yeah, it's something like, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll wait on the motion and all like that, but assuming that we move forward, I think the next step would be building out internally our search committee to then work directly. I think that will answer, like, the process that Ken talked a lot about is, if you hire us, 2 to 3 weeks later, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna build out that schedule, right? They're gonna help us lay out how to do this properly over the next 8 months, so we get to the end line. So I wouldn't want to say, here's how we do it, and then have Ken say, well, that's not really how you should do it. But I think the first step is we should have at least 2 members, I believe, from each district join, the process moving forward. To be clear, that will involve, a significant number of meetings, time, interviewing, all like that. So it is not, I would say, a light lift. There'll be ups and downs. I think for the next month, there probably won't be a lot, except maybe one initial meeting. And then that group will help build out community stakeholders. And so who else do we want? How many teachers do we want involved? Who do we want involved? That smaller group will probably help build that out. There'll be times when the whole board, we need to have time at meetings in the coming months, potentially, where we have a 15-minute update, and sometimes it might be an hour-long discussion. So, this is one of our main tasks as a SAU board, is hiring a superintendent. So I think we should expect as a group that there will be time, probably at just about every meeting, except maybe the first one, where we're talking about this for some period of time.
Any questions about that, guys?
Two pieces. One, have they commented about the current applicant pool right now? Do we see? I would imagine, given the current state where we're at in terms of the economy and in other districts, is there a healthy applicant pool there? And two, have they done a recent salary survey? Are we realistic about what a quality? Because you can go through this whole process and they come back, well, here's your candidate. But when you look at the sticker price, so that's the other thing we need to consider as well, because you may say $10,000, $10,000 isn't a heck of a lot. What you're going to be paying a superintendent, considering the amount of work that's going to go into it. But I will caution that once we get through this process, you may be surprised and get a healthy dose of sticker shock from that. So just everyone be aware.
It's gonna be very important during budgeting time as well.
I was just gonna say, it'd be really helpful if there were some information that this group could provide to me so that I could budget more accurately.
I'm sure they have that. They have to. I mean, with the housing move recently, and they've done several different searches, they have to.
And we did talk about the applicant pool. I'm not sure if it was with NASDAQ, but across the three, we did talk about the applicant pool. And that was part of the reason that we're bringing this forward in this meeting versus waiting another few weeks. It's to just get ourselves on board. Yep.
I have a question. Will this work be done in tandem? I mean, if superintendents are deciding on their contracts in November, we don't have 5 months to fiddle around with community forums. So we need, I mean, not to poo-poo it, but that was run out of time, trying to figure out what we want. So it seems like it would be really imperative to have the posting up as soon as practical and start gathering names while we sort out the rest of it. Is that So the question is that part of their process? And that bit about putting out, I think it's like mid on the bullets supposed to, maybe that's not a chronological list.
No, I don't think that's chronological, and I think that's, to me, that's another good reason to hire a firm, because they're gonna help us like figure out what are these steps, like when do you wanna have them, when do you wanna have these forums, to make sure that you know, you're getting the information at a reasonable time, so it's not wasted, right? We don't waste $1,000 on forums that ultimately don't inform the decision-making process. So that would be something, I think, again, they talked at length, Ken talked about this first meeting where I'm gonna lay it, I'm gonna hand you, like, here's how it's gonna go, right? I'm gonna hold your hand so you understand what the best process is. And if we say, we feel it's really important to have community forums, he's going to insert that, I believe, in the right place. Whereas, you know, for us to do that work would be a little more challenging because we've never done it before. So we have to develop it from the start.
If I remember correctly, they were pretty adamant that they would match our timeline. They would do what they needed to do to meet ours. So.
And I thought we were talking about posting it by like the end of September, like posting it next month sometime, but I'm wondering if I'm misrecalling that, but that was where we had talked as a board before about end of October, beginning of November. And I know they said, if you want to get ahead of it, you should do it earlier. So.
Yeah, I think that we would probably see more activity on this within the next 4 months than we would after that. Like the goal is to work with them or with, you know, this is what we're bringing forth. So if that's the decision, to then move forward relatively quickly and be able to, September might be busy for back to school, but it's also going to be busy for superintendent search.
Also, remember, this isn't their first rodeo, this is literally their business model, they got it down to like a science, like the particulars of what we're looking for, the bells and whistles that we're gonna have in process are like nothing, it's a very templated, you go through the process. Like, if they didn't do it successfully, continuously, they wouldn't be. So I trust their recommendation on that.
And that was one of the things that I got the feedback, like, look, you know, either of, you know, when they were talking about the top tip, either of these they'll walk you through the process, they'll tell you what to do, they have that in place.
Great. Any other questions? So Josh, the motion that you should pull it back.
Sorry, Amy had to do another computer for a second. Go ahead.
Just read your requested motion there.
Yeah, and if people want to tweak the motion, that's fine, because I was having trouble wordsmithing this, but for the board to retain the services of NESDAQ in order to support the superintendent hiring process based on the written proposal from NESDAQ.
So Josh made the motion, is there a second? Second by Kristen. Any discussion?
Did you want to cap on any of the costs?
I think we could do that next. Like,
100%.
we could say,
Okay.
yeah, so there's the contract presented, and then we can do a second motion about the focus group, because I think that should be first to address. Seeing no other comments or questions, let's call a vote. Since there's nobody remote, we'll just.
Hold on, Terry's remote, sorry.
Oh, Terry, all right, perfect. Hi, Terry. Terry, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry. I had a little trouble connecting because I
wasn't
have a
able
new
to
laptop,
unmute.
but I'm good. I'm here.
Terry, we can't hear you. My volume's up.
Hey.
I think it's thumbs up.
Yeah. I know, I can see you, Terry.
So, good morning.
I don't know if I have a panelist link for you. So Terry, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
We have to confirm she's.
I think hold on.
And then she heard the entire conversation.
I think she can hear us. I think the microphone, no, it's set on that. Did she hear the whole conversation if she didn't? Oh, when she joined. So yeah.
I'm good either way.
Actually, this is from the motion and then the discussion on the motion that she has to listen to. In fact, we'll put it in so we all work.
Yeah, it's set for the owl, so I don't know why it's not working, but I can try another speaker. Okay, Terry, can you try talking? She's muted right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We
perfect.
can, yay.
All right, Terry, just need to confirm that you are home and alone, or wherever you are alone, and it's impossible for you to be here.
I am in my hotel room alone in Boulder. Yes,
Awesome. And were you able to hear the entire conversation?
I believe so. But I can't guarantee because I had a little trouble connecting at first because it's a new laptop. So it's
Okay.
fine if I don't vote.
Okay. But we can still accept your public comments. Did you have any comments about it?
No, it sounds like I appreciate the thought that's gone into it, and I would vote yes if I was voting because it sounds like it's the right way to go. So thank you for the subcommittee for all the work you've done.
Awesome. Thanks, Terry. So let's do a roll call vote. We'll start off with John.
Lover, yes.
Lisa Merman, yes.
Hey, yes.
Lawrence, yes. Ron, yes.
Yes.
Gardner, yes.
Clark, yes.
Conklin, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Teresa, yes.
And Terry, you abstain?
Sure.
Great, thank you. So motion passes. Let's entertain a motion next on the public forum. Is that sort of the time that the
Community forum, I mean, and so you could do it two ways, right? You could cap it there, or we could cap like, because maybe there'll be some discussion amongst the board, hey, we really do want, there's a number of things that they are a la carte, and maybe the board would decide, so maybe it's like any additional cost not to exceed whatever we decide we don't want them to exceed.
So do we want to start off small and say 2,000? Do we want to start with a max of 4,000 and give the leeway to the committee, which we'll appoint next? Thoughts before we make motions?
I think 2 is fine.
2?
Yeah.
Two. Because this is already over 10,000 that we had budgeted,
Yep.
so it's an additional 2 on top of that. It's gonna be 10,000, 25,000,
Searching it right
12,500.
Oh, you're not, well, it's- let me eating with you. Forgot you.
now. I see my work.
Yeah, I know.
But 2 is well within sort of the sort of framework.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, this is coming under the proposed use of savings from all of the personnel
Yep.
changes. So yes, there is $2,000 available.
Okay.
I would say two things about it. One is it's notional, so your initial meeting, fruit of that, the recommendations, we have another meeting on the 25th or something, so if something makes sense, it's more or less, then you'll let us know and we can adjust as needed.
Yeah, whoever ends up being part of the next step with NASDAQ, certainly we would, I think we would be shooting to have a meeting between now and the next SAU meeting. And we'd be trying to lay that out so that we could bring that to, yes, whoever, I would assume whoever is part of this future group would want to do that. Yes.
Yeah, that would be sensible to say, okay, these are the things that make sense, it's $1,500 or it's 2,500, so yeah, we can either agree or disagree at that point.
Based on the numbers that we've already looked at, that they've given us for additional fee-based options, $2,000 is adequate.
Peter.
I'm good with the 2 to start. I'm curious about the brochure. I'm just curious whether they get a better response, and a better quality, is it a better fishing net if they use a brochure? I don't know.
Yeah, I think these would be good questions for us, whoever, again, the future committee to bring to NASDAQ to ask, hey, if $1,400 gets us 30% more quality candidates, maybe it's worth it, right? Versus, hopefully they're answering honestly about what their experience is with those kind of situations. So, yes.
So Stephanie, do you want to make that motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to cap the additional, an additional $2,000 on what additional items that could be provided by NASDAQ. That makes sense?
Or authorize the use of up to
Authorize
$2,000
yeah.
towards the additional a la carte services as
There you go.
NASDAQ may recommend.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right,
Great. Do I hear a second? Is that by Anna as well?
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion?
Just to reiterate, it would be appreciated if whoever the committee is,
Come back and say what it is.
report on what they're doing and why they made the choice.
Awesome. No other discussion? Let's call the vote, roll call vote. And Terry, you did hear that, correct?
Yes, I did.
Awesome.
Glover, yes.
Delay Zimmerman, yes.
Yes.
Lawrence, yes.
Braun, yes.
Echo, yes.
Sorry, good.
Gothier, yes.
Art, yes.
Conklin, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Teresa, yes.
And Beam.
Beam, yes.
Awesome. That motion passes. So the next item on that item is going to be the selection of our superintendent search committee. I'm assuming some of the same volunteers would still like to participate.
I'm happy
It's a
to.
lot of time that's going to be coming up here, so I just want to make sure you guys are still comfortable with that.
I can't speak for anybody else. So I'm happy to do it.
So 2 members from each board.
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
If possible.
So Dan and Hannah, do you guys comfortable doing it again?
How much is it?
I'm assuming there's gonna be no site visits because that's,
We have it all. I can probably do most of it.
I'll step up, but right now I'm heading into.
well, just need some for yourself.
Yeah,
What are the meetings at?
that'll be determined by.
Yeah, I mean, I think the committee will have to figure that out. We were having, I mean, it's summer, so we were having in summer meetings in the morning, but, and I think Ken's work is like, I mean, this is what he's doing, a consulting job after, so I think he's pretty flexible is my sense. Now, if he's got 3-4 people he's trying to meet with in a day, it might be more difficult, but, so I can't speak to exactly when the meetings would be, is when we can get the most people there, which is why I want to have 2, so that I want to have representation from each district at each meeting, so that, let's say one of the members can't make it, at least we have someone. So I know that doesn't really help because I can't, so we sort of get everybody involved. It's hard to know how it's gonna all shake out.
As long as there's flexibility, we can still dial in.
Oh, yeah.
And that will certainly.
We've had Zooms, we were having Zooms. Included.
I can do it, yeah, if we are able to kind of work around my class, that will start involving.
Cool.
She has.
Can.
So we have Dan, Anna, George, and Krista. Is that good? And then for Amherst?
It looks like it'll be Victoria.
All right. Do we want to do a motion of that, or are we just all comfortable with those assignments, maintaining the same status quo?
I'm fine with those assignments. I guess the one thing we say is we all have our original board meetings coming up this month, and our first official ones for individual boards. And I suggest that if any of those boards, when they meet, want to make their own adjustments, just let us know, because there are some people who aren't here who might be really interested.
Sure.
And we don't have to lock in with the 6 of us that we've got.
I'm comfortable leaving things as they are. I don't think we need a new motion to appoint new members. I think everybody's there and each board's going to send representatives. So cool. All right. Thanks, guys. It's a lot of hard work, and I know you guys put a lot of effort into it. So thank you.
Yeah, bravo.
Summertime. Moving along, let's go to the SAU Budget Committee. And this is the task force that sort of was taking a look at how we formulate, review, approve the SAU budget. And that, I wouldn't say was led by Ms. Facey, but Ms. Facey did a lot of the organization in terms of the presentation tonight.
And Ms. Lambrell as well.
Yes, Ms. Lambert, thank you very much. I was unaware of that. But does a member of the committee want to speak in terms of that presentation, or do we want to leave Amy to present?
I'm happy to.
Well, allow Ms. Facey, go ahead.
So you should have in your packet 3 documents. The first is, as Stephen was saying, the outline or actually the specific of what was discussed by the task force. The other document is a memo that I created explaining how the process went this past year. And that was sent to the committee members prior to the meeting to have some context to discuss. And then, finally, the FY24 proposed calendar for the SAU budget process. So just some basic information. We met in June and discussed the current process that we had gone through for the FY23 budget. Talked about some recommended areas for improvement. Discussed revising the policy related to the SAU budget, and also discussed the notion of placing on the warrant the question to adopt the provisions of RSA 194C9B, which provides a means to vote for the SAU budget on the ballot. The members of the task force present were members from each school board, Stephanie Grun, Tom Gothier, George Torres, and then Christy and I were there for the SAU. So we clarified the composition of the SAU Budget Committee, where it is one representative from each school district budget committee. So Amherst Ways and Means, Mount Vernon Budget Committee, and Advisory Finance for Sohegan. Those are 3 voting members, as well as a community member from each school district. Those are also voting members. And then 1 school board member from each of the school districts who should be part of the committee but are not voting members. So following a really good discussion on a lot of different topics, we recommended the following. We thought it was obviously very important to increase community outreach, to make sure that we have full participation from each of the school districts from a community member. And the SAU office agreed to place advertisements in the Citizen, on the SAU website, Nixle, the Sohegan sign. So Abby has helped us with that, and there is a notification on the SAU website. Nixle notice went out. I believe it's on the sign. I need to clarify that. We've contacted the Citizen a couple times. We're just waiting to hear back to make sure that that went out. We also put it on Facebook. I shared it to the Amherst Facebook page. But this is something really important that we all need to, get the word out to get as much community participation as possible. We also discussed making sure that we have appropriate meeting time is scheduled so that there's time to have a robust conversation and answer questions. So as you can see on the calendar, there are 2 meetings scheduled. We're starting the budget process for the SAU early in September so that we have a full 2 months in order to review prior to the public hearing, which will be in November. So we'll have a board meeting in September, a couple of budget committee meetings, another board meeting in October, and then finally the public hearing in November, which works out well for your school district budget so that we have that dollar amount of the assessment to be able to add to the school district budgets. We also spent some time talking about really being able to communicate what the SAU operations look like. I think a lot of people in town don't really know what happens here, and we're a pretty small office, and we pump out a lot of information and do a lot of work, and I think it's just not really well known. So we talked about taking a look at the personnel that existed at the SAU, say 10 years ago, or some number, and what we have today. Looking at, this was Christine's brainchild, a year in the life of the SAU, and really looking at, getting some statistics and data on what is produced by the different departments at the SAU. So some of the department heads are working on that. And then making sure that we find time, as I said, on the SAU board agendas and public hearings to include the SAU Budget Committee report and have their findings and have them actually report out as opposed to just listening to me talk. And we did have a very thorough discussion of the notion of the separate warrant article, and the committee recommended not moving forward with this process at the time. They agree that the SAU board members are elected as representatives of the community, and that that's their responsibility when voting to approve or not approve the SAU budget. The task force was comfortable that the improvements in the review process discussed above, the outreach, the additional education on what the SAU does, providing comparative historical and current data, And really encouraging an increased dialogue and transparency between the board and the budget committee would go a long way in terms of ensuring that folks are comfortable with keeping the process as we have it now, where it is voted on by the SAU board. It was also recognized that the SAU budget consists primarily of personnel, and placing it on the ballot potentially compromises the ability to retain and manage high-quality employees, creating instability in the central office and the potential for more turnover. So those were the recommendations, and the I guess the final recommendation was to take a look at the current SAU budget policy, and I say policies because there are several, in order to accurately codify all of the aspects of what is agreed upon. And the task force discussed that they could potentially craft an initial draft to go to the policy committee for review, and then let the policy committee take it from there in terms of vetting and following our routine approval process. So tonight, I'm just asking the board to discuss the recommendations and determine next steps that I just outlined.
Great. Any comments from Stephanie, Tom, or George?
I think one thing I would add, so we only discussed that RSA 194C, the one about the separate warrant article. Part of it was, and we know that there's people out in the public right now talking about coming forward with one that hasn't happened. And our discussion a lot around it was, you know, let's take a step first. Let's take a step and try and improve the process and improve the communication to the public first before we do the next thing. That's a big drastic step, potentially. Like Amy said, we don't know. I mean, we go to a default budget and there's ups and downs, what that can mean and look like. So let's take this first step. Let's document, let's make sure we communicate better, let's get a solid process in place before we even consider that next step.
Thank you. Good. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns? Victoria.
Something that I'm really happy to see in this is the conversation about needing to share out what the SAU does. I think we've all, as board members, we've all had at least one person talk to us and ask us what happens in the SAU building. Like, what are they doing in the brick school? And then when it comes to increasing community outreach, I really want to commend this list and make it really clear to everybody in this room that for community outreach to be really successful, we all need to turn around when we leave this room and contact 3 people. Let's say, hey, we're doing this SAU budget committee. We've always done it, but we're making sure that we reach out to the community. If you're not interested, can you reach out to some other people? Because the reality is that the 10 of us, 12 of us, whoever many are in the room, are more in tune with people who might want to be, might have opinions, right? They might want to be able to lend their expertise in this way, than a post in the Citizen or on Facebook. So I think that's really important. I think it's important. We found that it's really important when it comes to everything that our districts are doing. And I know as an Amherst school board, we're talking about other ways to reach out to the community, and I know other boards are also. So this would just be one of those first good steps of being connected.
It's a great idea.
Peter, does anybody have any idea what old school here direct mail would cost? So we could do a 2-page, a trifold 2-page, all the links to the SAU, also all the dates for the budget committees, and basically a snapshot of the next 6 months. And also at the same time, say, if you're interested, please call or contact your local rep, or however we phrase it up. But is it staggering to do direct mail? Is it possible?
Oh, it's definitely possible, because we do, the voter guides that way, so.
Amy, off the top of your head, the approximate cost when we send out the voter guides?
Yeah.
It's like,
I actually do.
I don't know, just figured we said something. It's not changing color. and-
It's not cheap, no, not essential.
I think
I mean, it's between 2,000 and 4,000. In the past, it's been between 2,000 and 4,000 to send out something like you're
Because
describing.
big packets, mailing, so, yeah.
But this would be.
And then
Big
Mount Vernon
packets.
too.
Yeah, this would be Amherst and Mount Vernon. So,
I think whatever, I think that you bring up a really much point, that we put in all these recommendations that are so thoughtful and really helpful. I think that along with that, we really need to think about engagement and how we're reaching out to public and find some way of measuring the success of that, so that we work smarter, not necessarily harder, and we're effective in reaching out to the community. And that might be something that we need to like kind of also build into our process, so that we can use that template moving forward, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, it would depend. We have a coffee shop that does work for us where they can put something together. We use a meter, so it's not stamped, and then they mail merge with all the citizens. So we're actually doing something for your board with that off there. I can get a quote.
It's like a postcard, Peter, right? Is that what you're referring to? Not like,
I think more of like trifold, so it opens up a piece of paper, but a piece of paper front and back is all the information. You're not gonna get much on a postcard.
Yeah. And it's more expensive to produce that with the cardstock, you use regular paper envelopes, would probably be at least same, might more than likely less.
But my other follow-up thought is, what does it cost to do a one-page insert in the cab, what's like Amherst paper called?
It's all, it doesn't go out anymore.
Did I believe that?
Couldn't we, would do something like that? Couldn't we come up with some informational flyer or something? Make it available at like the library, post it at Moulton, and post it at the homestead. And maybe have a number on that has the dates, you know, if people are interested, and maybe has a phone number or email, or, you know, a variety of ways if you would like a paper copy of this. One can be provided to you.
so we do that already, or at least up in Mount Vernon. We don't get a lot of response from that. because-
Probably not, but again, I think it's one that, like Amy was saying, that all the dates of everything coming up this year, you know, here's what's happening, and if you want more. I don't think, I mean, I think people,
Yeah,
I think everybody gets stuff online now.
I think you're right.
Or 95% of people get stuff online. I know
I would say yes, but there is a decent amount of people who are in the upper age range that are not doing the citizen online at all anymore, because they.
Right. And I'm thinking that way, those people,
You know,
if they had a number they could call, like, hey, can you mail me those? You know, we could have them available and moved out, you know, mailed out as needed. Do we have demographics of the resident addresses, like what age, potentially age ranges, and then maybe do a targeted mailing for certain age groups, and then do the online option for them?
We have previously done things that are similar.
Do we know like how successful it was or unsuccessful?
Yeah,
I
don't
mean,
think they're
successful in being delivered, 100%.
good. Red.
99%. I
Tossing
mean,
garbage.
you know, right. I don't know.
It's a very valid point, Pete. And I think when we take a look at sort of the budget process, this whole sort of conversation is about bringing more clarity and transparency to a process that some members of our communities expressed some doubts, to be honest, over the last year. And the more we can bring transparency and clarity to it, I think more people could be involved in the conversation. That's the whole point. So is to get many people at the table to make these decisions on behalf of our communities. From my perspective, I like the work that the five of you had done. I think it's, to me, very logical. I think the next step out of today, I think we can adopt tonight and say this is the process we're to follow through with this year, and then formulate this, sorry, Sarah, to the policy committee to cement this in writing and then create what future years will look like and how we want to sort of craft that. So take this as like a template and craft some language around it and create some formality to it. So 2 years from now, we're not doing something completely different and members of the community say, but this is the way it was supposed to be done because I've got a piece of paper here. So everyone's very clear about it. Anna.
on behalf of the policy committee, I heard Amy say that their committee had actually offered to take the first stab at drafting it. I thought I heard that.
And
on
Amy and I
behalf of the policy
can,
committee, if they're still open for it, we would welcome that.
Amy and I can draft, send to our task force for
Yeah.
feedback, and then bring it to policy.
Yeah.
So,
And there's several policies. There's
Yeah.
some, but there are multiple.
and I do feel like this process is outlined in print here.
Yeah.
So it, if it gets to policy mid-year, I think that's also okay, as long as we're set and approved for next year. And
I agree. Luckily, there's Christina's
we,
member.
yes, of the policy committee. So.
And Amy has lots of experience.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I
awesome.
feel confident that what would come to the policy committee would be.
The draft.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Quickly approved. That's awesome. So is everyone comfortable with adopting what we've got for our presentation tonight to follow through with this process for this year?
And any comments on the budget calendar? I've already invited staff to that, and hoping that I can get board member representatives this evening as well, so that I can get invitations out to folks.
I can do that first.
Okay,
Thank you, Joe.
Stephanie. Okay, great.
I have a comment on the vote.
Yep.
I can understand the rationale for not recommending a separate warrant. I think it's well argued, especially, retaining high quality employees. Right now, I think it's being talked about in the community because, at least in Amherst, everything except for the surplus stuff failed at the district level, but the baked in success at the SAE level. And that has been a source of WTF for some people who are concerned about that. And it's like, so nobody's getting raises or all that, whatever was proposed. I mean, the contractual stuff, it's all baked into the default, that's fine. But the SAU is getting everything that they proposed, ostensibly. Unless there's another decision to say, well, we have a lot of districts who are in default, so we're going to defer some proposed thing, maybe for next year. That would go a long way, I think, to satisfy the people that, well, we're gonna buy the new thing, but we can wait another year because everyone's in default, we'll try to come back up. So that was part of the outreach, part of the transparency, part of the decision-making process that go a long way. But without something that addressed that anxiety, I think some people will not be welcoming of, or would continue to push for voting on the SAU budget separately. That's the beat.
Yeah.
Follow up to that, because this is just me being new probably, when you, because I hope you know the answer. So if the school budget, if the individual district budget fails, the SAU budget is a percentage of that, or well, a percentage of the SAU budget is in that.
Yes.
Does that mean we fall back to a default of the SAU, or the full SAU just passes automatically every time?
That's.
Yeah.
If
That's
the-
what I'm getting
if
from people to have as a separate.
If the board.
The board's vote.
Yes, and you doesn't have to tighten it up.
I think she's talking about right now.
Right,
It's
that's.
just happening right now.
Well,
So, there is no default budget to SAU when they put forward their budget and when it's approved through their committee or through the SAU committee. That's it. Doesn't matter when anything passes, doesn't pass, that is the SAU budget. and
Even though it's incorporated into our budget, that then gets voted on and potentially rejected.
it's in our default.
So the way to look at it is the SAU is the vendor of the district, and the vendor set a contract that this board adopted, and that vendor gets paid regardless if your budget passes or not. And so it's included in the default budget and the proposed budget. If the proposed budget passes, great. If the proposed budget fails, just like a teacher contract or a school bus contracts are not included, but some sort of like maintenance thing that you signed with Eversource or something like that, it has to be included in the default. So
Okay.
that's the way, because the SAU, because we're a multi-district town, the SAU is its own entity as by contract. And so each town contracts with the SAU office to provide superintendent services. That's the reason.
So I think this is a good step. I think we should absolutely be looking at how it works and considering adding it to the ballot, depending how it goes. Because that feels a little uncomfortable to me. And that's just, that's I appreciate everything that's been said about wanting to keep people and all that, but it, I mean, I'm assuming that there could be at the SAU level, I mean, raises, salaries, things like that, that get included even in the default or baked in, if depending what contracts are, right? Anyone?
So, yeah, so what happens is, so even at the default budget.
Yep.
So teachers, because they're like, so not because it's a contract,
Right.
you get to actually include that in your default
Right.
budget. So the SAU, each of those individuals are contracted.
And they have the old
So
service.
those raises would most likely be included, I would assume.
No, we're not
not?
a collective bargaining agreement, and our raises are dependent on our budget. Yeah, but well, the PPC agreement, it's still a contract. We have, if I had a
Your raises would not be included.
no, if I had a multi-year contract that outlined my raises and that was approved by the SAU board, then yes, I think it would. But no, so if the SAU budget went on the ballot, about probably 99% of the budget is salary.
Right.
There's not, these tables were a gift from AMS 9 years ago. We, yeah, there's not much stuff in the SAU budget at all. So if we went into default, no personnel here would receive any raises. So you'd have pretty significant turnover at central office anytime the SAU budget was voted down, or we would be cutting positions here at the SAU, which was really the concern Amy and I brought to the task force. And again, our school district budgets are there's a little bit more shuffling that can happen in a school budget versus the SAU, which is very small and really only salary. There could be, like, for example, a project that, oh, this would be appropriate to wait a year because we're in default in a school budget. There's really not that wiggle room here in an SAU budget, which is what makes it challenging. And as Stephen explained, it's just a very different process because we're our own entity here.
So Anna, you got your hand up?
No.
Oh,
Just kind
George.
Yeah, just the reason why I was in support of the default of Valley is exactly what you explained. At some point, you have to allow management to have the ability to manage their group. When you start mucking around with it, I look at the SAU as almost like the central nervous system. They are the ones that, between all of the districts, between Souhegan, between Amherst, between Mount Vernon, exactly what she said. If there's a default budget, then what do you do? What do you do? And now you take away someone that was responsible. Oh, okay, now that these two people can handle it. You think they're gonna stick around for long? I deal with it all the time. Not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. And then my other, I guess the main question is, what percentage of the SAU is of the overall budget? How much are we actually talking about here? Because I think what we really need to do is, what this is highlighting, is we need to do a better job of communicating what the SAU does.
Yeah.
The reason we're having all these questions is people, what do they do? And that's a fair question. But when I look at the reality of it is, guys, you don't know what you're really asking for. You really don't. We're barking up an area that is very difficult, because I will tell you, people will not stick around. They will not stick around.
So in a non-cooperative school district, is the superintendent's office part of the one article usually?
It's within the budget. So if so like Bedford, for example, they're a single district SAU, the superintendent's salary is mixed into those school budgets essentially, because it's one budget that's voted upon.
So if they go into default, that affects the superintendent's office.
That would be,
Like it would affect all the other.
so that would be up to the business administrator and looking at what, when we're in a default budget, we look at what that default calculation is. And then we look at, well, what fell out that we feel is critical and what recommendations are we going to make for shifts and changes? So again, would Bedford choose the superintendent? Would they choose to forego their raise to help support something in a school? I guess they would have that flexibility because it is that same budget. But I don't know.
It's not a budget, it's a calculation.
Right.
It's just a number. So it is a defined number based on rules, but it is at the end of the day, just a number.
Yeah, bottom line.
To be spent however it is decided to spend it at the time.
By board. Which can change based on the circumstances that
Yes.
arise during the year.
So for example, this year we had some unexpected savings that actually really helped the Amherst heating budget to be able to fund some things that would have fallen out of the default budget. So it's difficult to say how the funds would be spent if it were in a default.
And
If it goes into default, then they would have the option of saying, if we can spare somebody from the SAU office, whereas we can't.
because they're
We're
different.
stuck in the same district, because they're all internal employees, right?
They vote on the school budget, so it's a better school budget, where we're voting on some key. And Amherst, we're voting on permanent, SAU distributed amongst each other.
Right.
Bedford goes, they're voting on Bedford school, but not the high school, not the all.
And it's also possible that their administration has some sort of collective bargaining agreement as well. I don't know every district, whether administrators are ever, what their contracts look like and what would be in the default or not.
George.
Yeah, and just to kind of further elaborate a little bit, I think at the end of the day, we have probably three things we need to identify. One is communication, certainly, I think we need to do. Identify what percentage of the SAU allocation makes each and every budget, because how much are you really talking about here? And then three, what are the increases you're seeing in that budget? Because I would imagine as a percentage of the overall budget is very minimal. If you may be seeing an average 3% increase, well, guess what? 3% ain't cutting it right now. So these are I think the question, the things we need to identify, because again, we have to be very careful about this, because at some point we have to make the decision what's best for the district. And some people don't know what they don't know. And I understand the sensitivity to some of these costs, but are you being penny wise and pound foolish? I say yes. And that's why I voted against. So, but
John.
I like what you're saying about it, George. I like what you said also about it, Christine, and what you wrote about it in the memo. So I'm kind of good with that. I would like to see, so one of the things that often gets trimmed out of the default, or sorry, in a budget that doesn't pass is any, increases in headcount, right? Because they're expensive. So if you're going to hire two new teachers, it's like, boy, you're going to relate the full string suggest, maybe you don't do that. So the big item like that, so if the SAU is proposing to add headcount, but none of the underlying districts can do that, and they want to do something like that, that would be a decision, I would hope, a decision and a discussion that the board would have with the SAU all together, be like, okay, when we do that, because we're all in default, maybe just because you could, maybe you shouldn't. Is promotion of our transparency and a lot of our community relations. So as long as we can have those conversations, I'm good with where we are in recommendations. Appreciate the discussion and the task force work.
And then we'll wrap it up.
I was just gonna say, I would echo that, appreciate the clarification on how it works, because, and I think, like I said before, I think as a starting point, this is a good starting point, and then we see if there need to be tweaks later on. I mean, I think about things like parents losing benefits and people not getting any raises, and I don't want y'all to think in any way that I'm trying to punish anyone at the SAU level either, but we do have to, like you were saying, look at what's happening across the board and make sure that the end result is what's best for all the schools. And the SAU, I mean, for all four entities combined, so.
Just as a clarification, paras didn't lose benefits in our district because of a default budget. They lost it because of a strategic decision to use some of those funds, the 180,000 that we saved, give or take, on benefits.
Yeah.
To be able to find another way to educate students. So it's not a budgetary decision because we went into default. It was a strategic decision. So just to clarify that as part of our budget.
I think it was before the budget, right? That
Correct.
came out.
Yeah.
I'm saying when we're tightening our belts in one place,
Yep.
we can't be tightening our belts in 3 districts, but, letting out 3 notches at the SAU level. It needs to be it should be a tightening by everyone if there's gonna have to be a tightening.
So what we're going to do now, Amy, am I correct that we want to just go ahead and do a motion to support the proposal as written in terms of the 2022, 2023 budget process? And then craft a written proposal to the policy committee for review and adoption for subsequent years?
And then assign.
Great.
Oh, we already did.
I didn't get a Mount
Oh, we
Vernon
didn't get a Mount
member. I need a Mount Vernon school board member to serve on the SAU Budget Committee, just 2 meetings.
Do you want to do a motion first and then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
perfect. So Danae, did you capture all that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. And do I have somebody that wants to make that motion? Thank you. Ms. Holmes.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Parisi. Any discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, let's do a roll call vote.
Glover, yes.
Liz Zimmerman, yes.
Maybe, yes.
Lawrence, yes. Brian, yes.
Petrov, yes.
Story, yes.
Gothier, yes.
Clark, yes.
Conklin, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Ms.
And Beam.
Beam.
Beam, yes.
Great, that motion carries. So now the budget committee members. So we said we have Amherst, we're all set.
Tom.
Sahegan, we're all set. And
Stephanie.
Mount Vernon? Cool.
Okay, Pete, thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Just for clarity's sake, I know we've sent all this out. Do we have any response yet?
Not yet.
So I would encourage everyone to take Victoria's advice and email some folks tonight that you know who might have an interest in it.
Cool. All right, guys, we went 15 minutes over, but it was a great conversation. We're gonna do public comment 2 of 2 and seeing the members of the public. There is no non-public session. So motion to close. And roll call vote because Ms. Beam's here.
Glover, yes.
Liz Zimmerman, yes.
Yes.
Lawrence, yes. Brian, yes.
Petrov, yes.
Gothier, yes.
Clark, yes.
Conklin, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Great, thanks everyone for, Ms.
And
Beam.
Beam.
Beam, yes.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for their flexibility. Sorry about the confusion between last week and this week, but we were able to pull it through, so thank you.
Thank you.